Eli lived in a small colony on the edge of a barren world, and his days were slow and quiet, filled with simple work, fixing wires and hauling crates, and sometimes talking to neighbors in the market, and nothing strange ever happened until the day he began to notice something about the alien who brought the mail each week, because that alien named Rin was not like the others. He was taller, broader, and his voice carried a deep sound that stayed in the air after he spoke, and Eli felt uneasy every time he heard it. At first Eli thought it was nothing because Rin always came with the same routine. He carried packages, he signed the records, he nodded and left, but slowly that routine began to change because Rin would stand longer than needed at the door, and he would look at Eli in a way that felt too heavy, like eyes that reached inside instead of staying on the surface. And Eli felt the weight of that gaze though. Rin said nothing. The first strange thing happened one quiet morning when Eli stepped out to sweep dust from the front of his house, and he found a small object resting on the steps. It was a flower unlike any he had ever seen, glowing faint with a pale light, as if it breathed in the shadows, and Eli touched it only for a second before pulling his hand away, because it was warm like skin, and he knew flowers did not grow on this world. The land was too dry, too empty, and that meant Rin had brought it from somewhere far. Eli carried the flower away and left it at the edge of the colony, but when Rin arrived that evening to bring a package, his eyes flipped toward the empty steps, and then back to Eli, and his voice was slow when he said, "Did you like my gift?" And Eli froze, because no one else could have placed that flower there, and he answered with a weak voice, saying, "I do not need such things." And Rin only tilted his head and gave a smile that did not look human before leaving without another word. From that moment, Eli could not rest easy because he began to notice how Rin appeared more often, sometimes with mail, sometimes with nothing at all, and each time he would ask small questions that felt harmless but carried strange weight, like, "Do you live alone? Do you ever feel the nights too long? Do you ever wish someone stayed with you?" And though the words were simple, Eli felt a shiver run through him each time, because it was not just curiosity, it was something else, something pressing. In one night, Eli lay in his bed trying to sleep when he heard footsteps outside, slow, heavy steps moving back and forth across the soil, and he held his breath, thinking maybe it was a neighbor, but the sound did not pass by. It stopped at his door, and after a moment he heard the faint scrape of something placed against the wood, and when the sound faded into silence, Eli rose with trembling hands and opened the door just a crack, and saw another flower glowing faint in the dust, planted right before his threshold. Like a mark, fear crept into Eli then, because he remembered the way Rin had looked at him, and the way his voice had trembled when speaking of loneliness. And though Eli tried to tell himself it was only kindness, he felt deep in his heart that it was not kindness, it was something darker. A claim made without asking, a step taken too far. The next day, Eli went to the market and spoke in whispers to an older colonist who had lived long among the alien kind, and asked if he knew what the flowers meant, and the old man looked at him with wide eyes and said, "You must be careful. Their kind is calm for most of the year, but when the season of fire comes, they are not safe. Their blood burns and they search for a chosen one to carry the fire. And if you are chosen, you cannot turn away without danger." And Eli felt his stomach sink like a stone, because he knew then what Rin had done. When Eli returned home that evening, he found not one, but 3 flowers planted in a line, leading up to his door, each glowing stronger than the last. And the sight made his knees weak, because the message was clear. The choice had been made not by him, but by Rin, and Eli whispered into the empty air that this was wrong, because humans were meant to choose for themselves, not be chosen like prey. That night sleep did not come to Eli, and as he lay awake, he thought of the eyes that followed him, the heavy steps that lingered near his house, and the gifts that glowed with unnatural life, and he wondered how long he could keep silent before the fire that burned in Rin would break through the door and force its way inside. Days passed slow and heavy for Eli, and he started to feel that the world around him was no longer the same because Rin came to his door again and again, even when there was no message and no reason to deliver anything. And at first Eli thought maybe it was nothing. Maybe the alien just wanted to talk because he was lonely, but soon Eli began to see that this was not about simple talk, because Rin would stand in silence at the door for long moments and watch Eli with eyes that glowed faint like fire in the dark, and those eyes made Eli feel cold inside. One morning, Eli stepped out to see a strange gift left at the edge of his steps, a small flower that pulsed with a soft light as if it breathed, and the glow made shadows bend in the dust of the colony street. And Eli touched it, but pulled his hand back quick because it was warm, like skin, not like any flower he had ever seen, and he wondered how Rin could find such things on this barren planet where no earth flower could live, and he felt his chest tighten because it was clear this was not a friendly gift. It was something more. When Rin came again that day, Eli asked him why he brought the flower, and Rin spoke with a low voice that almost shook the air around them, saying, "I thought you might like something alive to keep near you in the nights when you are alone." And Eli wanted to answer, but the words stuck because he could feel there was weight hidden under those simple sounds, and that weight felt dangerous. So he only shook his head and closed the door firm. The nights grew restless after that, because Eli would lie in bed and hear the sound of heavy steps outside, and though he never saw who it was, he knew in his heart that Rin stood there under the pale moons, waiting for him to come out. And when Eli rose one night and looked through a crack, he saw another flower, this one larger, planted deep into the ground like a marker. And the glow spread across the soil like veins of light, and Eli shivered, because he understood that this was not just a gift, it was a sign. Next morning, Eli went to the market center where the other colonists gathered, and he asked them if they had seen what Rin was doing, and an old worker leaned close and whispered with a trembling voice, saying, "You must be careful because their kind is calm most of the year. But when the season of fire comes, they are not safe. They burn with a fever that can twist love into madness. And if you are chosen, you cannot hide." And Eli felt his heart sink because he realized that Rin had chosen him. After that warning, Eli tried to keep busy with his work, fixing the cum relays and hauling crates, but even in the heat of labor, he felt those eyes on him like weight on his back. And when he turned, he often saw the tall shadow of Rin standing too close, not speaking, only watching, as if waiting for Eli to say something that would open a door and let him in. And Eli would walk faster and pretend he did not see, but the silence between them grew thicker. Days later, Eli returned home to find the entrance blocked with stacked stones, carved with strange shapes, and he knew Rin had left them there because no one else would dare to make such signs. And when Eli touched one stone, it burned his palm, and he pulled back in shock, and fear filled him like ice because the symbols looked like they were alive, pulsing faint with inner light, and he understood they were not just stones. They were marks of a bond that he did not ask for, but that Rin had claimed that night. Eli sat by the small light in his room and held his head in his hands because he did not know how to stop this, and the thought that no one could help him pressed down heavy. He remembered the words of the old worker, saying their season drives them mad, and if you refuse them, they do not let go. They take and take until you cannot breathe. And Eli felt his chest tighten like the air was gone, and in that moment, he realized that fear was not just at the door, it was already inside. The sound came again outside. His house, slow and steady steps across the soil, and then a soft knock, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. And Eli froze because he knew who it was, and he did not move, he did not breathe. But then the voice came through the door, low and trembling. "Eli, why do you hide? I bring only what my heart commands." And Eli felt the hair on his neck rise, because the voice was no longer calm, it carried something desperate and wild. Eli did not answer, and the silence stretched, but he could hear the slow breath on the other side, and then the sound of Something heavy placed against the wall, and after a while the steps moved away into the night, but Eli did not sleep. He sat awake, staring at the glowing cracks in the stones outside, until the first light came, and his eyes burned from the long watch. When morning came, Eli walked outside and found a new flower planted right against his door, its roots twisted into the wood as if trying to grow inside his home, and the glow from it was brighter than the others, and the sight filled Eli with dread because he knew Rin was no longer only giving gifts, he was claiming territory, marking space, and closing the distance, inch by inch. And Eli whispered to himself that he had to act soon, because if he did not, then the next knock might not wait for him to open the door. The next knock might break the door down. Eli stood in the middle of his small room, with the glow of the twisted flower still burning against the door, and his hands shook because he knew this was not just a gift and not just a warning. It was a message written in living light, and the meaning was clear. He had been chosen, and Rin would not stop until the choice was answered. Eli gathered courage and walked out into the colony street, while the pale sun climbed slow above the horizon, and he carried the flower away from his house and threw it into the dust far beyond the border fences. But when he turned, he saw Rin standing at the corner, watching with eyes that burned like coals, and the alien voice rumbled low, saying, "Why do you throw away what I give?" And Eli felt fear rise in his chest, but he forced himself to speak and said, "I do not want these things. I do not want you to come to me again." And he tried to keep his voice strong, but it cracked in the dry air. For a moment Rin was silent, then he stepped closer, and the ground seemed to shake under his weight, and he said, "You do not understand. My fire grows, and it cannot be put out unless you take it into yourself. And if you turn from me, then it will burn us both." And Eli felt the blood run cold in his body, because those words were not the words of kindness, they were words of threat. Hidden under the mask of longing, Eli hurried back to his home and barred the door with metal rods, and for hours he sat there listening to the faint sound of footsteps outside, sometimes near and sometimes far, and every knock of sound against the walls made him jump, and his thoughts twisted dark because he began to wonder if maybe there was no way to stop what was coming. Maybe no one in the colony could help him, because Rin controlled the routes of mail and supply, and if Rin decided to cut him off, then Eli would be alone with no link to the outside. The following day, Eli went to the small office of the colony guard and told them in simple words that Rin was haunting him with unwanted visits, but the guard captain only shook his head and said, "The carriers are given freedom of path, and we cannot act without proof of harm. If you want peace, then speak to him gently and keep him calm." And Eli wanted to shout that they did not understand, but the words stuck heavy in his throat, and he left the office with a sinking heart. When Eli returned, he found his door open, even though he had locked it with metal rods, and inside he saw his table covered with alien carvings marked into the surface as if clawed by glowing knives, and at the center of the table lay another flower larger than before, and the glow filled the whole room like the light of a second sun. And Eli stepped back in terror because he knew Rin had been inside, moving in his private space, touching the things that belonged only to him, and that thought broke something inside that night. Eli could not sleep, and when the moon rose, he heard the door creak and the tall shadow of Rin filled the frame, and the alien voice was low but shaking with strange emotion, saying, "Why do you run from me? You must feel the fire too. It is in the air between us. It is in the soil beneath our feet. It is in your blood now." And Eli felt trapped against the wall with no weapon, no help, and no way out. He forced words through dry lips and said, "Rin, you must stop this. I cannot accept you. I cannot live like this, and if you care for me, then leave me alone." And Rin shook his head slow and heavy like a stone rolling down a hill and said, "You speak with fear because you are human, and humans think they can choose, but you cannot choose against the fire. It chooses for you." And Eli knew then that he was not speaking to a mind that could be reasoned with. He was speaking to madness. Eli made a plan in secret over the next Days he worked in the relay station long into the night, pretending to fix the broken wires, but in truth, he was building a trap, a snare of energy that could be turned against the one who hunted him, and each time he worked he felt eyes watching through the vents and shadows moving in the corner, but he forced himself to keep going because it was the only chance. One evening when the colony lights dimmed and the streets grew quiet, Eli returned home and found the entire wall of his house covered with flowers glowing and pulsing like a living heart, and in the center, Rin stood tall waiting, and the air around him shimmered with heat as if his body was already burning from inside, and Eli stopped cold because he understood that the season was reaching its peak, and soon there would be no reason left in Rin, only fire. The alien spoke with a voice that cracked like dry earth, saying, "Come with me now, and the fire will be calm, or refuse, and the fire will consume." And Eli clenched his fists and took a slow step back, because he knew that the moment had come where choice and survival were tied together, and he whispered to himself that humans may be weaker and smaller, but humans carry something that even fire cannot control. And he prayed that his plan would hold when the time came. Eli stood in the glow of the alien flowers that wrapped around his house like living chains, and his heart pounded with fear and rage, because he knew this was no longer a game of gifts or signs. This was a cage made by Rin to hold him still until the fire of the season claimed them both. And Eli whispered inside his mind that he would not be trapped like prey, he would fight with every drop of human will. The night was heavy, and the moons cast pale light across the colony streets, and Eli moved fast through shadows carrying the small device he had built from the relay wires, a crude snare of current that could burn with sharp power if set right, and he prayed that the device would be strong enough to hold even a body as massive and fierce as Rin, because if it failed, then he would have no second chance. When Ayla reached the landing pads, he placed the device under the cum tower, where the cables spread like veins into the ground, and he set the triggers with trembling fingers, every step watched by the thought that Rin could appear at any moment, and he imagined those glowing eyes behind him waiting for the right second to strike, and that thought pressed cold fear through his skin, but still he worked because choice was all he had left. As he finished, he heard the sound of heavy steps echoing across the dust, and the air grew hot, and he knew without turning that Rin was there, and the voice rolled out of the darkness, low and broken with fire, saying, "Eli, you cannot run from this. It is inside me, and it will spread into you, whether you accept or not. So why do you resist when you could share the fire with me?" And Eli clenched his jaw and answered with a voice louder than he thought he could make, saying, "Because humans do not burn by command. We choose who we love, and we choose when, and that is our fire, not yours." The ground shook as Rin stepped closer, and his massive shape came into the light, his skin glowing faint with heat, his breath loud like a storm, and his eyes locked on Eli with a hunger that was no longer only longing, it was desperation, it was madness, and Eli felt the weight of it pressing down, but he held his ground and slowly moved back into the trap he had built. Rin spread his arms wide, and the flowers on his body pulsed brighter like veins of flame, and he said, "I have cut you from others, I have taken your mail, I have silenced the voices that might reach you so that you would be mine alone." And Eli realized with a shock that it was true. All the letters and messages he had been waiting for, all the news from far away, had been stolen and locked away by Rin, and the rage inside him rose higher than fear. With sudden force, Rin lunged forward, and Eli dashed into the circle of cables, slamming his hand against the trigger, and in that instant light burst across the ground like lightning, and the cables snapped alive with power, wrapping the air with crackling heat. And Rin screamed as the current struck his body, the sound tearing through the night like the cry of a broken mountain. Eli stumbled back as the giant form twisted and writhed, caught in the trap, his massive arms thrashing against the invisible chains of energy, and the flowers that covered his body burned away in sparks and smoke, and the glow of his skin grew wild as if the fire inside him was fighting against the trap, and Eli felt tears sting his eyes because, though he feared this being though he hated what had been done, he could still see the pain that consumed Rin. And it was not only the pain of the trap, it was the pain of a heart turned against itself. The ground under the tower shook as Rin dropped to his knees, and his voice broke apart in shards of sound saying, "Eli, let me go, or the fire will take me whole, and I will leave nothing but ash behind." And Eli stood trembling because the human heart inside him wanted to show mercy, but the human mind told him that mercy would mean death, because once released, Rin would not stop until the fire consumed them both. Rin raised his head and his eyes burned brighter than the stars, and he said, "If I fall, then I will fall with you, because I cannot leave this fire behind. It binds me to you until my last breath." And Eli cried out, "No, because I will not fall. I will not be bound." And he tightened his grip on the trigger, sending another surge of power through the cables until the air itself shook with light. The colony lights flickered as the tower strained under the force, and Eli heard distant alarms ringing through the night as systems overloaded. But he did not let go. He held the current steady while Rin roared and clawed at the ground, his body burning from within and from without, until at last he collapsed heavy against the soil, smoke rising from his frame, and silence spreading slow like a wavy lay. Fell to his knees, gasping for breath, sweat soaking his face and his hands trembling around the trigger, and he looked at the fallen shape of Rin, still glowing faint with dying light, and he whispered to himself that this was not the end yet, because the fire inside the alien was not gone. It was waiting, and if he moved too soon it could rise again. The colony guards arrived at last, drawn by the alarms and the sight of smoke, but when they saw Rin lying broken, they hesitated, and none dared to touch him. And Eli forced himself to stand, though his body ached, and he said to them, "Do not take him inside. Do not free him. If you do, then we are all finished." And the guards looked at one another, uncertain. But the fear in their eyes told Eli they believed him, and so Eli stood in the smoke-filled night watching the fallen figure of Rin bound in the trap of his own design, and he knew that the next moments would decide everything, because if the alien rose again, then the fight would not end until one of them was gone forever. Night was silent except for the faint hum of the cables that still glowed around the fallen body of Rin, and Eli stood with his hands shaking because he knew the fire inside the alien was not yet gone. It still moved like a storm under the skin, and if it rose again, then no cage of wires would be enough to hold it back. And the colony guards stood near, but none dared to come close, for they had seen the strength of Rin, and they feared that even in defeat he might rise again. Eli stepped forward, slow, his heart heavy, because he knew this moment was not only about survival, it was about what it meant to be human in the face of something that could not be reasoned with. And when he looked at Rin, he saw not only the enemy, but also a being broken by his own nature, chained by a fire that he never chose. And that thought cut deep, because Eli understood the cruelty of it, yet still he could not let pity break his resolve. The alien stirred, and a low sound came from his chest like the growl of a dying storm, and his eyes opened faint, still glowing with the last embers of fire, and he fixed them on Eli and whispered with a voice cracked and raw, saying, "You cannot leave me like this. If I burn, I will burn with you." And Eli shook his head and answered with all the strength left in him, saying, "No, I will not fall with you, because I am human, and I am free, and my choice is my own." Rin and tried to rise, but the trap held him down, the current biting into his body, and the flowers that had once glowed bright now turned black and brittle, falling to dust across the ground. And the sight filled Eli with grim sorrow, because the beauty that once shone with strange wonder had now become the ashes of obsession. And he whispered under his breath that love without choice is not love at all, it is only chains. The colony guards looked to Eli as if waiting for him to decide what to do, because they could see that only he understood the depth of what was happening. And Eli told them to keep the power steady until the fire inside Rin burned itself out, and though their faces were pale, they obeyed because the fear of what might happen if they stopped was greater than the cost of letting the trap run. Hours passed slow like years, and the night stretched long, and the stars above seemed to watch without care as the fire inside. Rin fought against the trap, and little by little the strength faded from his body until his voice broke into a final cry that carried through the empty colony streets, a cry that was part pain, part longing, part rage, and when the sound ended, there was nothing left but silence and the smell of smoke. Eli stood over the still form and knew that the fire was gone and the obsession had burned itself to ash, and he felt no triumph, only a heavy sadness because he had looked into the eyes of something that wanted to love but did not know how to love free. And that tragedy would haunt him for the rest of his days, but he also felt a small spark of pride because he had held to what it meant to be human, and in that moment, he saw clearly that the strength of his kind was not in power or in fire, but in the fragile choice of the heart. The guards asked him if they should carry the body away, and Eli told them no, leave him here until the morning, because the ground itself must take him back. And when the sun rose, the ashes of the flowers and the glow of the alien body had all faded into the soil, leaving only marks burned into the earth like scars of fire, and Eli knew those scars would remain for years as a warning to all who passed in the days that followed. Eli tried to return to his work fixing wires and hauling crates, but the colony felt different now because every shadow seemed to carry memory of glowing eyes, and every night carried the echo of that last cry, and yet people looked at him with respect and fear because they knew he had stood alone against the fire and survived. And though they did not speak it aloud, they began to believe that humans had something inside them that even alien storms could not break. Eli found the stolen mail at last hidden in the carrier vault, and when he opened it, he saw letters from far away, voices from Earth and from other colonies, voices he had longed to hear for months, and the sight of them made his chest ache because he realized how much had been taken from him in silence, and how much loneliness had been carved into his life by the obsession of another. And yet as he read, he felt whole again, because the words were real and free. One evening, Eli stood at the edge of the colony, looking out into the barren land where the last ashes of the flowers still lay scattered, and he whispered that he would remember Rin, not as a monster, but as a warning that even longing can become deadly when it is twisted by fire and need, and he promised himself that he would never let fear cut him away from the simple strength of human choice again. The stars burned quiet above, and the night was calm, and Eli felt the weight of the story settle inside him, and he knew it was over at last, and though the scars would never fade from the ground or from his heart, he had walked through fire and come out still human, still free, and that was enough. And so the tale ended not with victory that brought joy, but with survival that carried truth, because for all their power, for all their fire, the alien had no freedom and no choice, while humanity, even in its weakness, carried something stronger than any flame, the right to choose and to walk away. The end.